The AI podcast brings you new and innovative insights from AI and machine learning researchers and developers. The podcast is brought to you by your co-hosts, Arjit Sirkar and Christian Hart. In today's episode, we'll be talking with the authors of the recent paper to Err Is AI, Debugging as an Intervention to Facilitate Appropriate Reliance on AI Systems. So you'd think that humans would rely more on AIs if they understood them better, but plot twist, they don't. Today we're going to dive deeper into this with the authors who've actually researched this surprising conundrum. So before we go any further, a call out to our famous II, the mascot of this podcast. So for the II fact of the day, IIs can really give you the finger. The elongated middle finger is thin and almost skeletal. It has a ball and socket joint, allowing it to move 360 degrees. However, they're not rude. They in fact use this middle finger to reach into tree crevices to extract grubs. So, Arjit, this one was a bit of a shocker, which I think is becoming a theme for us.
It is, but this is more on the product side, the sort of human AI interface side of things, right? So you must be very excited for this one.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say less maths, but I've read the paper. There's a lot of maths. So that's okay. That's good. We see it. So maybe, Arjit, if you could briefly introduce our guests.
Sure. So we have got Gaole, and he's a PhD student, and we have got Ujwal with us. He's assistant professor at TU Delft. Welcome to the show. We are really, really excited to have you both.
Pleasure to be here.
So just to kick this off, the way I understood it is you're looking at helping the big question of why do people get in the way of kind of using AIs? They're overconfident, they're underconfident, but either way they're all over the place. So that felt like where you started. Is that where it started?
So it sort of started a bunch of years ago. Well, in the last decade, we've seen people absorbing AI and AI systems in all kinds of everyday walks, right? So we started wondering how exactly can we allow for more meaningful adoption of technology, and not just assuming that techno-solutionism comes to the fore where everyone starts saying, wait, we have a problem and let's try and solve it with AI, right? Quite often what we found in our own work, but also just looking around at technology as a tool to solve real-world problems is, sort of contextually dependent and ground in the actual problem space, right? You can't start off by saying, I'll solve this by using AI. And that's where it all begins, right? We started observing that there's a lot of money from not just big tech companies, but also from governmental bodies that support scientific research that was being pumped into AI. So what we wanted to try and understand was how you can allow for, better interfaces between humans and AI systems. And in that vein, a lot of different efforts were leading to the same overwhelming result, which said people tend to fall into two rather broad buckets of behavior. One, where people tend to over-rely on AI systems. And imagine a world where you have a perfect system, right? In such a context, over-reliance is not a problem because, wow, wonderful, I'm using a calculator and it's always going to tell me how do numbers add up and it's never going to give me the wrong answer. Wonderful. But that's not the nature of systems that are prevalent in today's world, right? A lot of times, systems that people tend to build and use are ones that are quite problematic and erratic in nature. And that's where the can of worms becomes a real problem to contend with.
And I think, Ujwal, over there, right, I think sometimes it's not just the design of the system, the world changes itself as well, right? So I've been guilty of over-reliance, right? I use my GPS, and it has turned me down a street where things have changed, and I actually got fined for it because there was no left turn onto that road. But I got fined for it because I was relying. I was like, if Google Maps is telling me to go there, it should be fine, right? So yeah, I've been there, done that. I did not drive into a river. I've read stories about that, people driving into a river following that. But yeah, sometimes the world changes.
Absolutely, right? And that's the example of over-reliance. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is that other metaphorical bucket I was talking about, where user behavior tends to sort of deviate and fall into. And maybe you can resonate with this, Arjit, having had that distasteful experience of ending up in no man's land following your Google Maps advice. You probably, thought again when you were offered advice from Google Maps, right? And this tends to be something that people also build through experiences. Experiences add up and influence behavior. And if you realize that you've gotten the short end of the stick when you're at the receiving end of some AI advice, you would consider it or reconsider it and think again, right? And that's something that you typically observe as well. If people are at the other end of imperfect AI systems and they've experienced, things going all right because they relied on it, they would sort of overreact in the sense of saying, wait, I don't want to use this at all. This, wasn't what I signed up for. And then there's the lack of ability to tap into a potential advantage under contexts where those fruits can be reaped, right? So that's under-reliance, and you miss out on the opportunity to benefit.
I've been guilty of other places where oh, this is so close to me, I should know this place. I don't want to set it up on a map and then getting completely lost trying to find it. So yeah, been there, done both of those things as well.
But actually an interesting point in there, right, if I may, is why we tend to make certain decisions. So one of the interesting factors in your own reflection as well is domain knowledge and the prevalence and familiarity of the technology at play. Right now, GPS systems have been around for a very long time, right? And although, general public who don't, maybe lay people don't necessarily need to understand every nail that goes into a complex system. A lot of us who fly don't necessarily know a damn thing about computational fluid dynamics, but we're very happy to fly around. And we know for a long time now that flying is far more safer than other kinds of transportation mechanisms that we put ourselves, in harm's way of, road transport, for instance, right? But the fact that you're quite familiar with GPS technology, you're probably using it, also shapes how we tend to calibrate our trust and reliance on these systems, right? There's a societal factor in there. There are a lot of people around you who are relying on it safely, and this can be fine. And then there's this notion of domain knowledge. If you truly know how GPS systems work and you know where the pitfall could potentially be, one of the things we know and understand is in larger cities where map-related data is more up to date, you're probably better off in relying on such systems. But if you go to more rural areas where map-related information or satellite imagery isn't all that robust, that's where things can go wrong. So that knowledge can also allow you to calibrate when it's likely going to be correct and when the advice is likely going to be incorrect.
Right. And what is fascinating is this is almost, this is about the human psyche rather than AI, right? It's about us more than the systems we use. And I was actually chatting with Christian on this, and I was thinking that the example that popped into my mind was autopilot, right? Now we are very familiar with co-pilots coming in, Microsoft Copilot and every single tool that you use. But autopilots have been there for a while, and I looked it up, and apparently it has been there since 1947. That's a long time before any of us were born, right? 1947. I could not readily find any articles on this, but I was thinking there must be some stats as to how the adoption of that went. As a pilot, I want to land, my airport supports instrument landing. Autopilot has been there for decades. It's a stable system. Am I going to use autopilot, or am I going to land it myself? That kind of decision making. Are we talking about something similar here?
So I think there's a huge, puzzle to sort of unravel, because there are so many different cogs in this wheel, right? So you're talking policy making all the way to, individual decisions, context that people are embedded in. This is a massive socio-technical era that we're living in, right? You at the start of this discussion said something about how, is this about people, is this about technology, is it about both, right? So if you think about this again, the way technology is built influences how we tend to behave and lead our lives. The way we lead our lives and live in the world as it is today will then shape new technology, because you're often building technology to support things that you would like, right? So this is sort of something that works in circles, if you may, and which is why, this whole concept of a socio-technological system is one that appreciates the fact that humans and technology and the society at large are so intertwined that they shape each other over time. So when we try to understand what is it exactly that brought AI into every household these days is a topic of discussion, no matter how little or how much we understand about it. In part, has a fair bit to do with the AI hype as well, the benefit of a more connected world that we have now than we ever did before. So I think it's all of these factors amplify the messaging that's been built around it. And that's where many of the problems also come to the fore, in terms of now that more people can potentially interface with AI, does this mean we need to be more careful about how these technologies are perceived, adopted, acknowledged, depended upon, right? Because if it's just a small ecosystem, it's easier to improve or build over time, navigate, because it's less impactful. You talk about flying and looking at this from a historical perspective. Autopilots have been around for a very long time, but it's also technology that has improved, and there was enough space and time to make them highly accurate, highly robust, right? And before you could actually then use them in adoption, and then the scalability of that solution grew over time, right? What you're observing with AI, on the other hand, is most of the AI systems, I would argue, that people are using these days aren't all that transparent, aren't trustworthy, aren't robust, but they're captivating the average person's imagination. And that's something, as scientists who want to build and propagate responsible technologies, it's something that you need to be concerned about.
So, Ujwal, you've just given us an amazing background into kind of where the thought space was that you were coming from. So let's get into the paper. What was the experiment? What did how did you attack this kind of question of over and under reliance?
Sure, yeah. Maybe I can just paint the broader picture, and I'll pass the buck to Gaole to talk a little bit more about the experimental setup itself. For those of you who are interested in understanding the background of why we're asking this question, for a while now in the human-centered AI community, which is the broad research community that I associate with and identify with, we've been thinking about how we can help humans calibrate their trust and reliance in AI systems. What does that mean? Well, trust in AI or trust in technologies is something that researchers across different research communities have been studying for a long time now. People have been wondering, how can we build interfaces, mechanisms, interventions that can allow humans to get the best out of their collaboration with technologies, right? And with the whole proliferation of AI in different ways, as we were speaking about, this question found a new meaning and momentum because of how important and urgent it was. And many of us started looking at different ways of helping humans calibrate their trust, right? Imagine I'm building an image recognition model that is supposed to recognize or detect scenes in a particular context, right? Does the scene resonate with what a classroom would look like versus a bedroom or a kitchen, right? And now I take this model that I've built and developed in, say, the western part of the world and deploy it in the East, where these scenes could look completely different. The kitchens in the East are probably quite different. The salient facets that would identify or help you identify a kitchen would be quite different, right? For humans, it's rather easy or relatively easier to identify those nuances and still observe those scenes and recognize them accurately. It becomes far more difficult for machines that we're building, right? Those are the sort of nuances that are difficult to observe about ourselves and our environments, right? Because as creatures of habit, we tend to make a lot of shortcuts to just deal with the world that we're surrounded by, right? So that's where the complexity of the problem comes from, right? Why do you want to try and come up with ways in which you can help people better trust systems, and how can you come up with better reliance behaviors, right? So that's the background. And Gaole, I'll pass this on to you to talk about our very experiment.
Yeah, so maybe before I zoom into the experiments, I can also give you some brief introduction. So why we look into the error of AI systems, or the mistakes or disadvantages brought by the AI systems. So you can imagine in the early analysis, people looking at the collaboration with AI systems, we highlight a lot about the accuracy, the explanations. These are actually from two different perspectives. So first, the accuracy. That means you need to say understand and be conscious of, say, like how often the AI systems may make errors or how much possibility that it will bring some, say, like unexpected outcomes. So when you think, okay, the AI system is highly accurate, it will be fine or it should be correct, it's better than me, okay, then you just put your trust and rely on it. But actually, it's not the case because the AI systems, they are black box neural networks with a large of the parameters. But actually, you can't predict whether it's correct in a specific case. So you need to be very careful looking at the, say, predictions. And also sometimes the explanations can help because the explanations give rationale to support or just let you know that maybe the AI system is not reliable enough. So from this research, actually we realized the human perception and the real accuracy or the real performance, there is a substantial gap. Okay, then there is a issue for the humans. So like humans may have some misperception of themselves. For example, you think, okay, you are experts on this task, but actually maybe you are just a beginner on this job and you can only achieve maybe 50% efficiency as the top expert. So there is a gap between your performance, but it's also the case for your perception and in the AI systems. So actually we did two different works. One is on the perception of humans. So that work is we attribute to the human cognitive bias, Dunning-Kruger effect, and we did find that the Dunning-Kruger effect will affect user reliance on the AI systems. And this work actually is from another direction, say the human perception and the actual performance of AI systems. So we want to see that what if humans find the AI system will make errors and they see that the systems they trust may sometimes just provide something very untrustworthy. So how they should calibrate their, say, thoughts and adjust their behaviors, such as reliance, adoption, or AI advice on the AI systems. So for that purpose, we say did this experiment and try to verify our, say, hypothesis. So here we choose a task which most people can do. It's just give you hotel reviews. We ask you to detect whether it's written by the real customers or it's just faked. But now this task should be easy for most people. But actually, we also notice that in the existing work, we find that machine learning systems, they rely on specific patterns to do their prediction jobs. So for example, the dataset we use is actually published from an existing work. So they find that when there are specific words like the, say, for example, Chicago or something mentioned, it's highly possible that the AI systems is misled to think it's genuine. So we also provide the guidelines how you should detect when the hotel reviews are actually facts or when the hotel reviews are actually genuine. And then we actually show both the guidelines and how AI systems work on the tasks. So based on the guidelines, you can detect, okay, maybe at this task, AI systems are actually making errors because actually they don't detect some necessary patterns. So actually we want to see that how humans will behave after observe, say, AI systems actually making errors and making errors based on their own knowledge. So here actually we have two parts, the guideline tutorial to help them understand how they should work on the task, and the explainable AI, how AI systems actually work on the task. Based on the learned guidelines and learned domain knowledge, they will figure out, okay, maybe at this task, AI system is not trustworthy, then let's see how they will adjust it. And we also set up like a session to detect how well they can really detect the errors of AI systems. We just show them several tasks finished by AI systems, and they are supposed to detect whether AI systems do the correct job or not. And then after this tutorial, their actually mindset changes because they are asked to debug AI systems. They know AI systems make errors. Then actually when they work with AI systems, they are with a more critical mindset, and they are supposed to say like determine, okay, maybe now I should rely on AI systems, or now it should be wrong. Let's make my own decision. So this we would expect, okay, humans calibrate their trust in the AI systems, and they are more careful on relying on the AI advice. So we would expect the over-reliance get mitigated with the debugging tutorial, but actually, according to our experiments, the mitigation effect is minimal. At least it's not significant. But we still find that with specific ordering of the tasks, like different levels of trustworthiness, and then humans develop a different, say, like trend with working with AI systems. So we conclude that it may help, but actually our experiments may be inadequate to give a very, say, conclusive, say, a conclusion about this problem.
So
That's what we
what order of operations was more successful, or which, because you just said there that you did different ordering, and some of them work better. So what does that have an effect on it in terms of ordering?
So actually we find the decreasing impression ordering works better. That means you put the good tasks at the beginning and then show them the bad case. And because actually
Okay.
here actually we did mention that maybe it's something about first impression. When your first impression about AI systems is they're making errors, then actually you may say just your trust is totally broken and it's very hard to repair. But actually when you first work with AI systems, you realize, okay, it's accurate to some extent, but they still make errors. Then maybe you calibrate your trust and then know that there are errors, but they are still good. So actually, I think there are some trade-offs because the first impression, like as we know, when we have a bad first impression about some person, maybe we tend to not trust this guy or just not work with this guy. So there is some other factors will affect how we trust and how we say like form their collaboration relationship with the AI systems. But actually in our study, we only focus on say like debugging tutorial and how we should manipulate the ordering of tasks. So based on our observation, I think future work should steer different contexts, like different tasks, and also different factors. Maybe we also need to control. Okay, now basically we first have a good first impression. Now let's do the debugging. Or now we have a bad first impression, but how we can calibrate your trust, not just totally distrust the AI systems. So there are future work to do.
I want to unpack quite a lot in that, right? So the first thing I would like to, like, it's not an unpacking, but it's more a comment, right? When I read through the paper, I found it pretty hard to, like, without doing some side research, figuring out whether the reviews were genuine or not. So it was the first time I was doing it, right? But the example that you gave, I was looking at the review, and the only thing that made me suspect that it was fake was it said the hotel room had 2 bathrooms. I was like, okay, all right, okay, it does not happen really. So it must be a fake, right? But talking about landmarks and stuff like that, it's easy to get fooled without doing the side research, figuring out. I've never been to Chicago, right? So it's talking about a landmark in Chicago. I don't really know whether it exists or not. I don't really know if the hotel is next to it or not, right? So, but I can Google and find out. But without doing that, it's quite a difficult task for me as a human to do. So that's one.
Yeah.
The second thing is I really want to, and we'll spend some time on this, unpack Dunning-Kruger effect for our audience, right? What is that? And the third thing, and it was just awkward to me as you were speaking there, Gaole, is there's a lot of effort, and a lot of money being spent, especially in our industry, financial services, right, in explainable AI, explaining how AI works. Now, and what I think is your study has a remarkable finding here is effectively if you explain it too much without it being performant high enough, it might actually work the other way in terms of human confidence of that system. So I think that's fascinating.
I think I've seen that with risk teams. Just to kind of sidetrack. I think in certainly in financial services, because it's financial services has advanced risk teams from the start. It always has done. Other industries are rapidly building risk teams, and it's new to them. But risk officers who've spent their whole life looking at risk are suddenly presented with something which is not binary yes no. It's probabilistic, and they don't know how to deal with it because they want to see an outcome which is 100% always. We all know that that's not how AI works, and to be fair, it's not how humans work either. And I've certainly experienced firsthand risk officers really struggling to accept and approve a solution which doesn't give concrete answers. And I think it's the same thing. They can't get their head round that kind of, if they can see it fails, they want to put it in a box which just says this is wrong.
Yeah, and to date, the solution for that, Christian, has been like hey, let's get more data scientists to figure out the explainability of the model, right? So we will like reverse engineer what the neural net is thinking and trying to figure out why it's coming to decisions. But the
Yeah,
study finds out that that actually might not help.
I never thought that helped.
Sorry, yeah, I was just about to say that the early days of XAI research very much was running on the hype train of explanations are going to change this game forever, in the sense that they were cast to be this shining light that'll allow humans who are interacting with complex AI systems now magically understand what's happening behind the curtains and what's been swept underneath the rug. Like, let's move these black box models, bring them into light, and change them into these glass boxes that people can look through. And what we learned a decade later is explanations don't do all those things that they were hyped up to, and they don't live up to the promises. And for the most part, again, like we were saying, one of the most difficult problems in computer science is humans, right? Because you could build a system that's perfect in terms of what it's meant to do functionally, right? And then if you forget the fact that these are real humans and users who come with their own bag of experiences, cognitive biases, behavioral traits, or behavioral habits, then, that's only one part of the puzzle, right? So going back to XAI and the promises and why things sometimes don't turn out to be that way is quite often you need to think about the quality of the explanation methods, right? The fidelity of the explanation methods, which is if this complex decision-making model is, coming up with this final advice based on some, black box level hidden but complex reasoning mechanisms. Is my explanation method correctly representing that to the user, right? So that's about the fidelity of the model. And you have a lot of great technical work that has been coming out of the machine learning communities trying to improve fidelity of explanations, right? But they only go so far, because now that I've empowered my end user who's relying on this model for whatever reason with this profound understanding of the complex mechanics of this model, have I also empowered them to use it correctly? Not quite, right? You've given them an impression of what's happening, right? And quite often it's people who don't necessarily have the domain knowledge or the years of training and learning a particular science to really catch on to all those nuances, right? So how can you then support them to at least use these systems in a meaningful way for them, right? That's the big question. What is a meaningful way for one user can be a completely different notion for someone else. So there is this need to personalize and adapt how somebody can use a particular system, interact with that system to reach what we can imagine as being this area of optimal collaboration between a human and a machine, right? The whole idea of interacting with an AI system is that there is something profitable out of that endeavor, which is why we often say trust is not the goal. Your goal is, or should not be, the goal, right? Quite often when we come across these kinds of conversations, especially in the context of industry and tech, people try to drive trust in technologies, and that shouldn't be the goal, right? If you just look at years and years and decades of research in human-human interactions, when we study trust in humans, and whether it's societal or transactional trust, the goal is never just to build trust, right? I'm not having this conversation with you all with that goal of trust being something I want to seek at the end of this, right? But trust acts as a means so you can have a conversation and collaborate, right? So the same should apply when you're building technology. Our goal shouldn't be to increase trust in AI systems, but to calibrate it in a way that can then create grounds for collaboration, right? Why? Because collaboration can potentially lead to improvements in productivity or solving problems that you couldn't previously solve. And XAI, for the most part, sometimes deviates from that goal, because now you're presenting users with a so-called explanation that somehow is supposed to or meant to help you out. And that creates this, an illusory sense of explanatory depth, right? If I was to tell you that, hey, this complex model is actually doing this, and I throw, a few convincing lines that don't explain this to you, but tell you that, or give you a hint if there being something that sort of makes sense, I guess it's right. It's very easy to convince people, right? And explanations often tend to do that. They don't really help users calibrate their trust or reliance, but they tend to create this illusory sense of explanatory depth that allows you to say, wait, I better side with the AI system because there's an explanation now, as opposed to just trust my instinct or not use the system at all.
Yeah, actually, I can also add a bit to the explanations. So I can show you most explained by AI methods. It's actually not designed for human. So it's not human-centered explanations. It's more say like, oh, we want to see what makes the AI systems to reach the final prediction, or say like maybe we should lend money to somebody, or why we should say like that organize figures as potential risky for the cancel. So we want to know the truth of the deep learning or AI systems. So what they do is actually mostly say just taking piece of the input, like which parts the AI systems focus most or put attention on, and finally we just use it as a truth to show to humans. But actually this is useful to some extent because if this aligns with your expertise, let's say you are a doctor, if it points out some very important concepts or areas, what it is, okay, then it's meaningful. But for most people, maybe it doesn't make that much sense. For example, the large language models, they digest a lot of the tokens or say like documents and give you some outcomes. If they generate free text explanation, that makes sense because everyone try to understand it and with some rationale. But if it only points out, okay, there's several words triggered my prediction, okay, then you need to figure out how it works. Then actually there is a missing piece for your understanding and how it actually works. So actually, most experimental methods, their problem is they are not designed for humans or most users to understand. They can only align with say data patterns or something that may only fit a very small percentage of people to digest. Or even for the doctors, actually with some of the say like interviews, we find doctors are also not satisfied with the explanations because they find, okay, sometimes I can't figure out what the numbers really tell us. We only know, okay, these areas or these tokens are valued by the AI systems.
I want to get back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the way I understand Dunning-Kruger is, and actually when Arjit and I were talking about this, he gave a great explanation. So which was like the guitar one. So when you first pick up a guitar the first time in your life, you're like, okay, I have this wooden thing with strings. What do I do with it? So your confidence is very low because you have no idea how to play. But then, someone teaches you a few chords and, you can play Smoke on the Water with just like the 3 basic chords. And you're like, brilliant. And this is great. I can play. So that's where your confidence is way higher than your ability.
Yeah.
Which is great. And you can get there quickly. Guitar is, it's an easy thing to make it sound reasonably good. But then as you go forward and you think, all right, and now I'm going to play something else, you suddenly plummet and your confidence disappears because you suddenly realise that actually it's quite hard. Yeah. You probably need to put in a lot of work and train your fingers and things like that. And then you have that proper learning curve. So I know that, you've talked about that, but I really want to tie that concept back to your experiment. So
yeah, let's break this down a little bit, right, to answer that. And I mean, since y'all are, going to throw some fun facts about the I think I'll drop a fun fact about the first time I encountered the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Ig Nobel Awards. So the Ig Nobel Awards are these brand of awards given to products of science that pique curiosity, but arguably don't change mankind as we know it, right? Or don't change how we're probably going to live on the planet for the next many years by a lot. One of the examples I give about this is the understanding the fluid dynamics of a ponytail, right? Oh, wait, what is that going to do? But it's great science, right? And I came across the Dunning-Kruger effect because it won the Ig Nobel Award at some point. I was a PhD student.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it did.
Oh.
And I was a PhD student back then when I came across it. And it captured my imagination because I thought I could resonate with it in terms of the experiences I've had. An example I often give when I teach classes, and I'm talking about cognitive biases, and Dunning-Kruger effect is very much a metacognitive bias, is our experiences going into exams, right? Many of us and perhaps your listeners can resonate with this feeling of going to an exam. And if you've done well, so let's take a math exam, for instance, you've gone in and you come out, and if it was a difficult exam, you probably feel like you've done reasonably well, but you're not quite sure. But then you've also experienced this where you feel like, I think I did well, I'm going to score well. And then the grades come out and Turns out you didn't do all that well. Now, what is that hinting at? So if you were to give me a math problem and ask me to solve it, I need a certain set of skills to solve it accurately. Now let's picture the lecturer or teacher or grader who's grading your solution and trying to see whether or not it's been accurately solved, right? Now, the set of skills that I need to solve it accurately are exactly the same set of skills that the teacher or grader would need to grade it accurately. And that's the metacognitive aspect we're talking about. For me to excel at a certain task, I need some skills. But for me to be able to recognize those skills in myself, right, I need the same set of skills. So the argument basically boils down to, if you lack competence in a certain task, then you probably lack the competence to recognize whether you have that competence or not. And that's the massive connect back to our own work when we're trying to study how humans engage with and interact with AI systems. Right? So if we agree that for the large part, one of our biggest concerns is how AI systems are navigating the general society, and a lot of times people lack the training or the domain understanding of these systems, but they're still interacting and engaging with them. And I think that's good, right? It's great if you can propagate nice ways of supporting, amplifying the abilities of humans and build human-centered interfaces that can get the most out of those collaborative contexts. But the danger is when you don't scaffold around it, right? And then you sort of just feed into this potential of individuals who lack that competence of, in a particular context where they're operating with the AI systems. And they might fall prey to the Dunning-Kruger effect, where because they lack the competence, they also don't recognize the absence of that skill in themselves and think, well, maybe I can, or if they fall on the other side of the explanations, right? Bad first impressions. These are all connected facets, right? Now, if I find that, I would miscalibrate my own competence and think I'm better off than the AI system, I might rely more on the AI system even in a situation where the AI system can actually help me out, right? So that's something that we observed, and it's not something that we started off with, right? So our experiment wasn't, this particular paper wasn't exploring whether the Dunning-Kruger effect is relevant in the context of human interaction with AI systems. Gaole, in fact, led a piece of work that was published at our premier human-computer interaction conference called CHI. It's a widely attended HCI conference. And we had a piece of work which was squarely studying this notion of Dunning-Kruger effect and how that has implications on human AI interaction. But this piece of work wasn't necessarily studying it, but we did observe the Dunning-Kruger effect in play when we looked at all the bracket of participants we had in the study and tried to put them on the pedestal in terms of their performance, right? And then we divided our participant pool into what are called quartiles, basically based on their performance. And then you can look at the top performing individuals and attribute this notion of them being competent in this task, and maybe the ones that were least performative in terms of their accuracy as being relatively less competent. And then when we made these comparisons of their performance but also how they self-assessed themselves, it became apparent that the Dunning-Kruger effect probably has something to say as well in terms of explaining and helping us interpret our observations.
That's a brilliant explanation. Thank you so much.
Remember that at the onset, our whole idea was to try and induce critical mindsets amongst participants so that while they engage with this advice-giving system, they would use their now reformed critical attitude in incorporating that advice or not, right? And that a part of why maybe our hypothesis didn't go the way we expected could also be, a product of our choices in the task space, but in the explanation method space. And that's something that we just have to live with because, that's what science is about, right? Like you think about a good way of studying the problem and then you discover some of the things that may have influenced your findings thereafter. With the, transparent nature of communicating this, the hope is people can build on this and over time you understand a phenomenon in a greater level of detail, right?
Yeah, it's a working theory, right? It's a theory until it's disproven. But my question was more about, do you have any plans to further on this in the future?
Yes, in fact, we do operate on a battery of different types of real-world tasks, right? So in our own work, so there are several people in our group, and I'm speaking from the experience of having worked in this area for a long time, but also with a number of PhD students. Gaole himself in his own work has been looking at a number of different tasks as well. We've looked at things like loan predictions. This might interest you, Christian, talking about financial services, right? So a loan prediction is one of these tasks where AI systems have been increasingly adopted. For instance, should a particular loan applicant or application be approved or not, and based on what grounds, assisting experts who are making these decisions has gone a long way in increasing efficiency so far. But there are also biases that can crop up as a result of incorporating AI in these decision-making processes. So how can you come up with a nice way to build on that efficiency without falling prey to potential unintended consequences like bias, right? So there are lots of different tasks that not just us but others in the research community have been picking up, and for the most part, a nice place to consider tasks is the real world, right? You don't want to come up with a task that isn't necessarily going to be something you would observe in the real world. So that's what we talk about when we say we want an ecologically valid experiment, right? To what extent is this something that people would encounter in the real world? This is one of the first things we discuss, right? So for now, we are working on a number of different tasks. Medicine is another, or healthcare is another area where there's an increasing impact of adopting AI systems. Again, you have to tread that ground carefully. If it's a high stakes decision, then you'll probably be more mindful and more critical in relying on AI advice or an AI system. But if the stakes are low, you're probably willing to take that risk, right? And again, now what is that willingness to take that risk? It's a personality individual trait, right? Are you risk averse? Are you, okay with taking risks? That again becomes an individual trait. So all these things are intertwined, and as you rightly pointed out, looking at a full breadth of tasks is one way to understand when a single effect actually can be construed as being a generalizable finding, and that benefit is only gained once we look at a wide bandwidth of tasks. But yeah, those are just a couple of quick examples.
So with your current knowledge, what you've learned so far from your study, what advice would you give to a product owner? From what you've learned, you've seen counterintuitive outcomes. It would have been quite simple for me as a product guy to go, hey, I want people to trust my system, so I'll explain to them how it works. I'll show them I'll kind of lift the lid or on the box and kind of go, look, here's the moving pieces. You've shown that that's maybe not such a smart idea, but in really practical terms, you're talking to a product team. What advice would you give them so that their solution would be more successful outcomes?
Yeah, this is obviously a question that all organizations and businesses are considering seriously these days, because I'd also like to bring to fore the notion of time, right? The temporal spectrum of things. It's well and good to say we'll build momentum around the product by trying to increase trust in the product. I'd like to break that notion of trust further down and say there's actually a nuance in there. Is trust in your product warranted trust, or is it unwarranted trust, right? For the most part, what we tend to observe, especially in contexts that coincide with unintended, unfortunate consequences, is this is a product of unwarranted trust, where because of all kinds of hand-waving and wishy-washy marketing campaigns around the reality of a particular product that is being shipped, right? But that trust is unwarranted, right? What's the distinction? Well, warranted trust in a system is built because your system has delivered on its promises. Unwarranted trust, on the other hand, is trust that has been built because there are all kinds of other mechanics in play that take away the attention from what you should care about. Think about a website, for example. If a particular website is supposed to provide me with information on any given topic, then I can build trust in it as long as it keeps delivering on that promise of giving me the information I expect, right? Warranted trust. Unwarranted trust, right? Make this website look absolutely magnificent, build it with responsive, it's beautiful, and it creates this illusion of a competent authority that is behind it. Now that can breed grounds for unwarranted trust that can be completely tangential to whether or not it delivers on its promise of providing me with the information. The same can be applied to the lens of AI systems that are being built. Now, should I care about what's the quickest, fastest way for me to make $1 million, or should I care about building an enterprise that can build warranted trust amongst its customers, users. And I think approaching it with responsibility is something that's important, because that's also then going to be the vehicle of a lasting enterprise as opposed to making the quick buck, as because people don't fully understand the perils of the technologies that happen to coincide with the potential gains.
My takeaway from what you just said, and I 100% agree with you, the goal of any product team should be to build systems that develop warranted trust. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, I think one thing I did notice is, quite a lot of people just say that our large language models are amazing, do everything for you. But actually, instead of doing that, I'd say do something very practical and simple and easy to use. So my point would be, don't say like overselling, just do something very practical and easy to use. This also, I think, reduce the gap or the needs for the AI literacy, because you just provide something that people really need and use.
Yeah, good advice. Okay, so our final round is called the Lightning Round. Okay, so our first Lightning Round question is, can transformers get us to AGI? No? Okay, cool.
Okay.
My question is, why AGI?
That's a good question.
The answer is no, and the answer is also that's it's not the right question we should be asking. So I think I would like to think about our endeavor of trying to build AI systems and propel and advance AI technologies as being something that should come from a human-centered perspective. So as opposed to saying, how can I build machines that can think like humans and act like humans and reason like humans and do everything like humans? How can I build technology or technical systems or pipelines that can amplify my experience, that can improve my experience, that can support me in tasks that I'm already doing, is probably really important to think. I'd like to speak about one, notion I'm a massive fan of. It's something that I first came across from John Zimmerman, who's at CMU in the US. He spoke about the AI innovation gap in one of the visiting talks he gave here at TU Delft, where he brought light to the fact that we as scientists and technologists and engineers often try to take the shiniest new hammer out there, so think large language models these days, and try to solve the most difficult problem that exists. As opposed to doing that, if you can, and there are a number of different technologies, and it's not just machine learning or AI that I'm talking about that this can apply to, you could apply some of the extremely reliable methods or models that are available to solve maybe some less glamorous but highly impactful real-world problems, right? And I think that should be our collective endeavor, as opposed to necessarily wondering whether AGI is away from us in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, which is probably not the vehicle of change this world needs.
I 100% agree with you, and I think RJ's probably laughing because
I 100% disagree with that, but
I'll
come after Christian. Go on, Christian.
I was going to go that I agree because, from my experience using AI and getting the most value from it, was doing simple things. Simple is probably grossly insulting to the poor data scientist who spent 6 months working on it, but simple use cases, well-defined and constrained use cases. That's where we got the biggest results, the best results.
I think both of you are looking from a practical perspective, right? You're trying to go towards a goal, and you're saying that, okay, and you are practical, and you're right? In that perspective that AI is a tool. But I think the reason I disagree is we are discounting the human psyche, right? And I think AI, for many, including myself, is a unique way of trying to figure out how the software works. Because guess what? We can cut a brain, but we don't know how the brain works, right? So you're discounting that bit, right, as a goal. The complexity is sometimes a driver, because it's a challenge. It's a unique challenge that we go into the unknown for. So I'm going to represent that voice as well.
It's a good one. Okay, RJ, do you want to ask the next lightning question?
Sure. Yeah, I think I already know the answer to this, but should we keep training larger foundational LLMs?
Well, the answer again to that, I guess, as you suspected, is a resounding no. Gaole? And then I have something to add to this, but I'll let Gaole take it first.
Yeah, actually, I would separate these concepts to different people. So for companies, if they are, say, like contributing to social well-being, wasting their money to do the trials, I would encourage them to do, because they have the resource. But actually for the average researchers, or say like most people, I don't think that's a good solution because you need to spend a lot of time and efforts to just understand what's happening. But actually, it's not what you are expected to say like do. What you should do, I think, is still working on your jobs and try to pick up how AI systems can actually amplify your experience or just improve your efficiency. I think that makes us better.
So I think I'd like to tackle that question from a higher level of abstraction, because I think quite often it's easy to paint ourselves in the comfortable confines of our immediate disciplines or our immediate surroundings. If you were asking me this question from a purely technical perspective, from the lens of computer science and how it has changed, of course, thanks to scaling up compute, we've realized the potential of generative AI. OpenAI probably being the big exponent of that allowed for us to understand what is truly possible in the sense of building intelligent machines. But I think studying that and talking about that and having this conversation in those confines is problematic from how I look at it. Case in point, think data centers. And there are lots of well-documented today, thanks to some restless work from amazing journalists like Karen Howe and others, and scientists like Kate Crawford, right, who's tried to document every single pebble that is turned and flipped when, say, a company designs a product like a digital assistant. What exactly is happening? What's the entire supply chain like? What are the unexpected consequences? What are the untold stories? How many millions of people are affected as a result of that? So Karen Howe did an excellent piece recently in The Atlantic. I'm guessing some of you have come across it. Not to throw shade on one of the big tech companies, but it studies some of the promises made by a big tech giant and how they fall apart when it comes to the ground reality of the actions they take. Right. So I think it's important to broaden the conversation. So of course, there's enough evidence that suggests scaling up works really well, and large compute can lead to potential scientific breakthroughs. But I think the big question there is at what cost? At what cost are we willing to go after the scientific? Again, it's the Oppenheimer conundrum sometimes, right? That becomes a relevant conversational point.
No, it's good. I like it. But so what we'd like to know here is just if you can suggest to the audience, who should they follow? Who should they listen to? Who are you following that you think is, you'd recommend and think is just a really great person to, add to your follow list?
Yeah. Again, I'd like to take that question with, so it's something I'll treat as a true scientist, right? And I'm reflecting on how I do this myself. So I particularly tend to approach it not from, hey, this is somebody I'd like to listen to constantly, but trying to broaden the spectrum of people that I'd like to listen into, right? Because you have newfound thought leaders that spring out of nowhere every other day these days, and I like to sort of cast my net a little more widely and sometimes also dabble with thoughts that I don't immediately agree with. This very relevant question, right? I love the question. I think as opposed to naming a couple of people right now, I would rather stand up for suggesting that we can approach this from a perspective of being intellectually humble, and trying to broaden the spectrum of people you listen into can help you not just understand diverse views and perspectives, but also then get somewhere closer to the true, right, morally sound, ethically grounded perspective that I think is only noble to aspire for. I've bumped into Karen Howe at a conference in Singapore a while ago. I'm sure she doesn't remember me anymore, but she's done some meaningfully impactful work in the recent past. So Karen Howe is a journalist now. She was trained as an engineer, and then she, I think, had a budding career in tech, and she sort of abandoned tech because of her discoveries with some of the perils that don't fit well with the promises, and then she turned into a journalist who's capturing the hidden truths behind some of the technology that's being propagated, and she's written an excellent piece most recently that was published in The Atlantic about the hypocrisy of promises made by some of the big tech and what the role of AI is in all of this, how AI is very much a double-edged sword. That's someone I'd recommend to listeners.
Pretty good recommendation. What about Gaole? What do you think? Anyone you think that people should listen to?
To be honest, I don't think anyone is everyone has their own interests or other factors will impact. So I would say if you really want to know the thoughts, you just need to maybe check different people with maybe even conflict in their interests.
Okay, cool. That's fine.
All right. The next question, I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but and probably the answer would be why is this question? But we asked this question, which is the percentage chance that you'd put for an AI apocalypse happening.
Gaole, do you want to take that one? I think Arjit knows my answer.
To be honest, I don't think so, except that some stupid guy gives a grants or some very important resource to the AI systems. Otherwise, I don't think they can really substantially impact, especially, say in our research topics. We highlight a lot, say human in the loop and human in the control, or say any risks, or say like high stakes jobs. So for that case, I don't think they can really control the world. But if you mean, say like they post something online and in the digital world, if we don't have a very, say like very good mechanism to prevent the automated generated content, there can be propagation of misinformation. There can be, say, something like this. Okay. But I don't think they can really control the world, especially consider their intelligence level.
Close to zero, but not quite zero.
Yeah. I mean, they can make harms, but I don't think they can control the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I agree. I think there's a theoretical probability of that happening. Of course, theoretically that's possible, but I would vote for good conscience and humanity to prevail over that battle. And I think another, I'm an advocate for having conversations that are a little more tied to the reality. And I think, one of the issues I take with, I think general conversations, they're often taking place at the two extremes, right? Is AI going to rule the world versus is AI the silver bullet that will solve all the problems? And I think the reality is somewhere in between. And I think, we need to have more of these conversations about that space in between, right?
What's interesting in this question, we regularly talk to people who are at the top of their game in the AI world, broadly speaking. What's really interesting in asking that question about, the percentage of an AI apocalypse is the answers are wildly different.
Yeah.
You've got very pragmatic, measured answers like you two have just given. The guys we interviewed the other day, in fact, the episode we published just the other day, they were giving like 26 and 30% chances of an AI apocalypse. And, that's a very, very high material percentage of risk. And admittedly, these guys work in AI risk, so they're carrying their own bias because they look at dangerous behavior every day. That's what they study.
And the thing is, Christian, this is a loaded question, right? But I think this is almost saying that how much faith do you have in humanity, right? Because as Gaole, exactly. you said, right, some human has to actually either create an AI or give AI the powers to the nuclear codes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But how much faith do we have in human beings being able to not do that, right? So this is probably a hidden question for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think indeed, right? I think which is why there is a theoretical possibility of that happening. But as long as we believe in the general good of a human who's in control of moving the large levers, that's probably why it's a close to zero probability in my view, right?
So the last question is about your favorite model, technique, language. So this is kind of a technical, kind of a data science one, but from whatever your domain of experience is, what's the tool, the technique that excites you?
I'll take this one from the technique standpoint, and we've been grappling in the XAI space for a while and human AI interaction and trying to build appropriate reliance. So from that standpoint and in the spirit of the conversation we've had today, I'd like to shed light on this relatively new but I think highly potentially impactful technique called evaluative AI, which was proposed by Tim Miller, who is now at the University of Queensland. As opposed to looking at explanations to empower individuals in terms of helping them understand why a model or a system is giving you certain advice, and therefore, by explaining a specific decision, you end up creating this explanatory depth, and often that is, illusory, right? As opposed to doing that, what if you were to provide this notion of, or support this notion of evaluative AI, where if there are a certain number of potential outcomes, you present evidence that supports each of these outcomes, right? And then the decision-making process is very much driven by the human, who's now empowered by some information on all possible outcomes, and they can better make a decision without necessarily being driven down a path by a decision support system, right?
Love it. Great. Gaole, what about you?
Actually, you did mention the line chain, the agentic flow stuff. Actually, I did get some interest in it, but not sure. It really say like it's a final choice for us to think the AGI or stuff. But in my mind, I think in the recent maybe 5 years, it seems like very promising because as with LLMs or something, as a control module, and you can provide many tools for them to do different jobs for you. And the good thing is actually we have very sophisticated tools for different applications. If we really have a like language understanding module or say like query control module, then actually you can actually do a lot for us. I think from this perspective, I think in the next several years, agentic workflow or the AI agents, they will make some impact. Maybe in the later research, we will find, okay, there are even more advanced formal AI systems. So let's see.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and you two have been brilliant guests on the podcast. So thank you once again. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting this invite to come over and talk about your paper and about the broader AI human interface in general. This has been really valuable, and I think it's very valuable for any AI product managers out there as to how they're designing the products and the reliability and the explainability of the AI.
Thank you so much
you've
for having
you've
us.
really shown us the value of being thoughtful. I think it's a really powerful takeaway.
Appreciate it.
Also glad to hear say what you want to know and what you are really interested in.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate
Thanks a lot.
it.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time on the AI podcast.